Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation. This is this week's issue of the Libertarian Angle, brought to you by FFF. If you'd like to know more about our work and you're first getting exposed to libertarianism or to libertarianism as promoted here at the Future of Freedom Foundation, visit our website at fff.org. I'm joined as I am during every week for the Libertarian Angle by my co-host Richard Ebeling, who teaches economics at the Citadel. Richard, good to see you again.
Great to be here with you and our viewers and listeners.
Yeah, likewise. Richard, you've been teaching Austrian economics for, 30 years or so. And one of the concepts that Ludwig von Mises, who is one of the real leaders in the Austrian School of Economic Thought, in my opinion, the greatest economics professor ever, well, maybe second only to you, that in his book, Human Action, and in the general paradigm of Austrian economic thought, maybe in the paradigm of free market economics, we come up with the term consumer sovereignty often. And so I thought, well, why don't we devote a show to this concept of consumer sovereignty, what it means, the concept of an unhampered market economy, as Mises called it, and the role of the consumer as compared to the producer, and maybe examine some of the implications for public policy, legislation that comes into play, mostly in terms of protecting producers, but sometimes even in terms of protecting consumers. So why don't you give us the overall kind of the big picture of what Mises and the Austrian School are talking about when they're talking about consumer sovereignty within the context of an unhampered market economy.
I'm happy to do it. Now, the real contrast to sort of set it going is that who shall decide what gets produced in society? From the mundane needs of food and clothing to the major issues of industry, manufacturing, agriculture, what type of scientific research will be done. Who shall decide these things? Should it be determined by the people of the society themselves, reflected by their buying and demand for goods and services in the market? Or shall it be some central planner or some government intervener and regulation who has the arrogance and presumption to think that he knows better than you and me what should be produced and at what values and what quantities and qualities and varieties? That's the real choice of it. Let's sort of take the opposite first to sort of better understand why it's important. Let's take the traditional form of Soviet-style central planning, socialist central planning. Under this system, the government made a decision as to what would be produced, from the mundane things of paper clips and pieces of attire, clothing, to the building of missiles in a Cold War conflict with the United States, the use of land, the use of resources and raw materials, the construction and the allocation of capital, machinery, tools, and equipment, was all determined by the state. Now, I happened to travel quite extensively during the latter years of the former Soviet Union, 1990 and 91. And during that time, you could go to the major stores, which were all, of course, government retail stores, no private enterprise to speak of, in Moscow, the capital of the Soviet Union. And what you saw in the stores were poor quality goods, narrow variety of goods, empty shelves with things that people probably did want, but that had not been produced under the central plan, and goods sitting on the shelves as unsold inventory of products because of their qualities, varieties, types, etc., that nobody desired. That is the system of government directing production. They decide what will be available to you, and where and what. Now contrast that with our society today, in America, for instance. Now, you and I, Jacob, have talked many times, and perhaps I would like to think our longtime viewers and listeners know, we have talked many times about the degrees to which government regulates, controls, intervenes, manipulates that which is done in our society and certainly in the marketplace. But for all of that regulation and control, we still have a market directed economy, not a free market directed economy because of those regulations and control, but in general, a free market economy in the form that we, the consumers, by our decision to buy certain goods and the prices we're willing to pay for them relative to other things that we could spend our money on, determines the profitable avenues for businessmen to decide what to produce, in what varieties and qualities and quantities, and in competition with other businessmen who also want to use the resources of the society, how best to produce it, to use the resources in an economically efficient and value-oriented way. So the resources of the society are efficiently and effectively used to make the products that you and I desire in the marketplace. Now, this concept actually originated with a British economist named William H. Hutt, W.H. Hutt. Now, for anyone who knows a little bit about the Austrian economic literature, the free market versus Keynesian perspectives, W.H. Hutt was most famous for being an extremely insightful and uncompromising critic of the Keynesian approach to government spending, government deficits, and so on. But in fact, in the 1930s, he's the one who coined this term consumer sovereignty to highlight the importance that a market economy gives each and every one of us great amount of latitude and liberty and freedom. That through our choices of how we want to spend our money, we determine how all the resources of the society are directed to satisfy what we want and desire. Not the planner, not the regulator, not the controller. And the producer himself has latitude and liberty. With the income that he earns from making things that you and I want, Jacob, he then can be a consumer himself. And he then can demand through the dollars he spends what goods he wants, and others then direct the resources under their control to satisfy him. This means that the economy is guided by the free choices of all of us, reflected in the incomes we earn and the things we spend it on. That important concept of economic liberty is profound. Let me just sort of direct this in one other way. This type of consumer sovereignty also protects us from the government in another way. That may seem a little bit indirect, but is no less true. And that is when there is a competitive market economy and businessmen are attempting to find what is profitable to satisfy the income earning consumers of the society, they're concerned in hiring others. Who will I hire a person? Which person shall I hire? What work shall he do? What qualities, skills, experience, and knowledge am I looking for to most efficiently produce the product that I hope to earn a profit from? He doesn't care about the person's politics. He doesn't care about the person's ideology. He doesn't necessarily care about the person's religion or even how he looks in most cases. What he's looking for is who can do the job best at a price that I think he's worth to satisfy a consumer demand. As long as there's a competitive market, a person can hold many political views, hold a variety of religious, and nobody will care, as opposed to being dependent upon the government for employment and income. And then if your religious beliefs, your ideological beliefs, the way you look is not compatible or inconsistent or contradictory to what the government considers good, right, desirable, or preferable, you can be denied work, or you can be shunted off to some narrow corner in the middle of nowhere because the government decides that's where you're going to be both a consumer and a consumer based upon what we desire and we command and direct you to do. So market liberty is profoundly important for consumer sovereignty and therefore the sovereignty of all aspects of our lives as free individuals.
Yeah, you reminded me of a guy I ran into in Cuba when I visited there many, many years ago. He said that, I said, what's it like working in a country where everybody works for the government? I mean, it's just such a shocking notion. But that's the system of central planning, is that the government is planning everybody's lives and everybody's resources, but at the same time it's guaranteeing jobs and food and housing for everyone. It's the total take care of people society. And he said, I said, if they get mad at you, all they have to do is fire you. And this is one of the points that Mises made about the centrally planned economy, is that when they control who eats, they have total control over you. And if you're fired and the state's the sole employer, then your only alternative is starvation unless people share their limited food with you. And I said, do they ever do that? I asked this guy, and this guy was a libertarianish type person. And he says, no, they never do that. He says they're never that brutal, at least not in Cuba. But he says what they do, though, is they find out that you have a girlfriend, something like that. This guy was a young guy. And he says what they do is they transfer you to another part of the island, like 100 miles away from your girlfriend. They'll split you apart. And he says this is the power they have over you. But one of the aspects of this thing that really intrigued me, Richard, when I was first learning about Austrian economics, is this concept of inequality of income. That the idea that some people make more money than other people. And I always get emails from people from the left saying, oh, it's just terrible that you all don't recognize or appreciate the fact that some people make so much more money than other people. And of course, my response always to them is saying, look, you're lamenting your own system. I mean, you've had this welfare state way of life, this regulated economy, centrally directed economy way of life, something that we libertarians are against for decades now, and it has produced an outcome that you don't like. And so you're not going to get me to defend your system. But of course, what they're referring to is what you pointed out, is that they want less of this market-driven concept that it still exists in the United States. I mean, we do live under really a variation of socialism with the welfare state, where the government controls people's income, decides how much they're going to be permitted to keep. That's what the income tax is all about. You've got massive regulations. You have government control over many aspects of the economy, like through the Federal Reserve Board. And so it produces these outcomes, but as you point out, there's also a lot of market-driven activity in this thing. Well, as libertarians, we oppose the whole welfare state, regulated economy, centrally planned part of this thing, but we don't oppose the idea of inequality of income, because that's what would happen in a purely unhampered market economy. This is one of the things that Mises points out, that when the consumer is deciding who gets the money, sometimes it results in an outcome that people might not like. And I remember Mises pointing out that sports figures or rock stars, or people who are very popular among consumers, end up in an unhampered market economy. That is an economy where there is no welfare state, where there's no government involvement, where it's just a total free market. That is a market free of government control or regulation. That consumers very well may make people like rock stars or sports stars, football players or basketball players, baseball players, the multimillionaires, while the professor, the economics professor, the Richard Ebelings of the world are, making, whatever, $60,000, $70,000, whatever the going rate for professors is. And so you can see a professor saying, well, this is highly unfair. I've got all this education, I've got a PhD, and I'm only making, $80,000 while that guy's making $80 million. But that's the idea of an unhampered market economy, is the consumer is driving this by his buying habits. And that there's nothing unjust about this, because that's what freedom's about. And especially when the only other alternative is for government to get involved, and this is what people on the left want government to do. They want people to take from the sports star or the rock star, take his money, give it to the professor or to people at the bottom of the economic ladder, and equalize wealth. But in order to do that, they have to use force. I mean, there's no other way. And that force comes involved with the IRS, the tax system, the forcible taking of people's property. And what inevitably ends up in an unhampered market economy, while there are disparities of wealth, and can be tremendous disparities of wealth, you normally have a very strong middle class, people that are making, $50,000, $100,000 and have, a few $100,000 in savings over a lifetime. But those at the bottom of the economic ladder are generally better off than in those societies where everybody is made equal through the power of the state. So while you may have billionaires, you have people at the bottom of the economic ladder living fairly nice lives. Plenty of fresh foods in the grocery stores. They may be driving a jalopy, but they have an automobile. They have television sets. In other words, their standard of living is higher than in an impoverished nation like North Korea, where everybody's equal, supposedly, but those at the bottom of the economic ladder are starving to death. So what ends up happening with this government equalization of wealth to eliminate the inequalities that come with consumer sovereignty is you end up with everyone being equally poor and possibly starving to death.
Yeah, another element of this is a theme that the Austrian economist Friedrich Hayek always was emphasizing. It was part of what he called the mirage of social justice. He pointed out that in the market economy, we're not rewarded in terms of the salaries we earn or the revenues we acquire or the profits that accrue to us in the marketplace through our exchanges. We are not rewarded on the basis of merit. In other words, the income I have as a professor is not determined by whether I'm a nice person, whether I'm kind to my dog, and so on. What I'm rewarded for is service. How well have I succeeded in serving my fellow human beings through the free exchanges of the marketplace, as reflected in what they thought my services were worth, in providing them with what they wanted relative to what other people were offering them. And since we don't all value the same things, I value some things more than others. For example, I like to read serious economics books, but I don't read many Harlequin romance novels. That means that my money is helping to determine the income of a serious economic scholar who's written a serious book, versus my not contributing to the services of the author of the Harlequin romance novel. So I've determined and influenced who gets paid what. Not because whether I think that economist who might have written this book is a nicer person, a more meritorious person, a more decent person, or a more, quote, needing person than the writer of the romance novel, but merely on the basis of who has served me more and provided me with that which I desire. Now, Hayek pointed out that if we were to seriously have a system of giving people income and therefore access to buying things based upon merit, that is, what is socially just, what is deserved, that to follow through that, the government would have to have a system of totalitarian, intrusive oppression, unimaginable. It would have to decide what each and every one of us was worth in their eyes. Was this a good person? Was this a hardworking person? Was this a lazy person? Was this a person who's socially useful more than someone else? And therefore, rather than income being based upon the choices of consumers, judging merely as to whether we've delivered a good to them that they desire, we would be hypothetically under an ethical, moral, and socially oppressive microscope in which those in control of the allocation of income would decide what our qualities, features, and characteristics are that make us more or less deserving than others in the society. We would be at the arbitrary power and control of those turning on and off, and the relative amounts of the spigot of income allocated by them to all the members of the society. Hayek argued, and I would certainly feel, that involves a degree of focused oppression that would be almost the worst mankind had ever lived under. The reason why he called social justice a mirage is because when you just say things like social justice, the imagery is sort of like you're looking into the distance and you see the mirage of a beautiful place, fair, good, everybody receives what they need. But once you get closer, the mirage disappears. You realize it's an illusion, because there is no one who has the knowledge, wisdom, and ability in a godlike fashion of all knowing and all good to know what you really deserve because of the qualities and characteristics you possess. And therefore, one mortal human being, not much different than yourself, would determine your fate as a producer and as a consumer and as an income acquirer of the goods and services to determine the quality and forms of your life, whether you like it or not. And that is tyranny.
Yeah, those are great points. You especially struck me with when you talked about service. And this is what people who advocate government intervention oftentimes don't understand, is that in order to get rich in an unhampered market economy, a genuinely free market, one that is free of any government involvement, in order to do that, you have to serve consumers. I mean, that's the whole concept of consumer sovereignty. The consumer, by his buying or refraining from buying, is deciding who's going to get rich or not. And so if you want to get rich, you have to serve others. And how do you serve others? By producing goods and services that other people like, that consumers like, and are willing to pay for. So you may have the most greedy, selfish, self-centered, narcissistic person in the entire world, a person that says, I will never share my money with anybody, I'm going to take it to the grave with me. But in order for him to get wealthy, he inevitably has to serve others. Now let's take an example. Let's take Bill Gates. Now I'm not suggesting Bill Gates falls in that category, but here's the wealthiest man in the world, if not, or at least one of the wealthiest. And how does he get wealthy? By producing something that all of us wanted to pay for. You know, this software that greatly benefited our lives. So even if that was not his intention of benefiting mankind, let's just assume that Gates said, I'm not interested in benefiting anybody, and of course evidence is to the contrary, that he does share a large portion of his wealth with others. But let's assume that the opposite. The only way he could get wealthy is by serving others, by producing goods and services that other people want and are willing to pay for.
Now, you know, this point is important to hammer away, so let me reinforce that. This year marks the 10th anniversary of this. This is the Apple iPhone. Now, go back 30 years ago, 40 years ago. You wanted to make a telephone call, you had to pick up a receiver from a base, a telephone base that was connected to the wall. And the only distance you could go away from that rotary dial base was how far that twirly cord would enable you to extend yourself. Then came a cell phone, but they were cloggy and they were bulky and they didn't do any much. And then they advanced the idea that on your phone you could do basic arithmetic. You could add and subtract and multiply. But then this guy, Steve Jobs, comes along and says, you know what, this could be a lot more than a phone. Not only cordless, but of almost everything that you need in your life. He asked himself, from what I've read, in designing this, what is the normal size of a person's hand? How could they hold it in their hand? Of course, I have the Plus here, so this isn't the original or size of most models. How can I hold it in my hand and with my thumb hit all of the buttons without needing to use two hands at the same time? What features would they like? Oh, they'd like music. They would like games. They'd like to watch movies. They would like. Now, Steve Jobs, before he passed away, was surely, like Bill Gates, one of the wealthiest men in the world. But every dollar he earned, to my knowledge, he didn't seem to have gotten very many favors and privileges for the government. If he got any benefits, it was indirectly because the regulations are there and those are the rules you operate in. But I don't believe that Steve Jobs ever ran to the government asking for a subsidy like the solar panel people do. And he asked himself, what is it that people could want with the features and quality that this could be everything? A phone, a movie theater, a typing facility, messaging, everything. In fact, just walk down any street in America, go into any cafe or restaurant. People don't talk. Or like when I was growing up on the New York subway system, they don't sit there reading a printed newspaper anymore. Their heads are buried in this. Now, there's right or wrong about that. People talk about the social psychology effects of the iPhone in, depersonalizing people. Okay, but the fact is, he earned hundreds of millions, billions of dollars, and he didn't twist an arm. He didn't put a gun to anybody's head. He didn't defraud, cheat, or manipulate or act like a huckster. He gave them something that has revolutionized the world of everybody, everywhere, even the most poorest person in some backwater corner of the planet. That is called fulfilling consumer wants on the basis that the consumers are sovereign. They determine to buy or not to buy, what value to place upon it. They decided the wealth that Steve Jobs acquired. And that is what freedom is about, and the revolutionizing and transformative improvement of the human condition.
All right, well, unfortunately though, Richard, as you know, the government gets involved oftentimes with legislation that is anti-consumer and pro-producer. In the unhampered market economy that we libertarians favor, one in which there is no government involvement, consumers are sitting back watching all these entrepreneurs competing against each other to serve us by producing goods and services that we want and are willing to pay for. Sometimes producers are not successful. They produce something we're not interested in. Or if Steve Jobs fails to make as good an iPhone, a good mobile phone that his competitors are producing, he starts to lose market share. As Mises pointed out, consumers are ruthless. They want the best of everything at the cheapest possible price, and there's very little sense of loyalty that if one of their favorite producers starts to produce an inferior product, they're going to shift to the superior product. But we have government stepping in oftentimes to protect these producers, like with tariffs or protectionism from overseas competition. And I think what people miss in all this is that it's the consumers that are getting hurt. That as soon as the government steps in to help with a producer saying, well, we've got to protect him from these low-cost products coming in from China and so forth, they're saying to consumers, we're going to have to deprive you of this wide ambit of people who are willing to serve you by making their goods, the foreign goods, more expensive.
Yes. The importance of this, as you're emphasizing, is that the protectionism and trade barriers are often presented, well, we're helping a domestic producer who's being unfairly competed against by some foreign supplier. So that here's an American being hurt, and we're helping him against some foreigner in another part of the world. The ultimate aggression, the ultimate victim of this is the consumer. Why is that American producer of whatever product it is losing business to his foreign-based rival? Because clearly the foreign-based producer is able to produce and offer on the market a version of the product that is either better in quality or is available at a lower price than the domestic producer can meet and match. And as a consequence of this, we, the sovereign and free consumers of the marketplace, have chosen that the best value for the income that we've worked hard to earn is on the product that just by the accident of history of a political border on the map of the globe is being manufactured and supplied by someone available producing in a foreign country and made available to me, as opposed to this producer who might be just a few hundred miles away in the territory of the United States, but who cannot match that competition. So the ultimate victim of this is the consumer. He is denied the better product at the better price, as well as the additional damage of hurting another individual in another country who has done nothing more perhaps than devise a way to make that mousetrap better at catching mice and market it at a lower price, but he's being harmed for his productive and efficient ability to bring something to bear to satisfy a consumer demand. That is the very nature of it. So do we want a consumer-oriented policy or a producer-oriented policy? Do we want policies in which producers in the marketplace must work hard to earn the revenues they earn by making those less expensive and better products? Or do we want to say that some producers are to be privileged and sheltered from those who would attempt to gain market share by competing against them for consumer business? It isn't against the domestic producer. It's for consumer business. The issue is, can the domestic producer match what, by accident of circumstances, just happens to be marketed by a foreign supplier?
Yeah, and you see the phenomenon domestically. I mean, look what Amazon's done to competitors. I mean, put a lot of them out of business, Borders and so forth. And people lament this, say this is unfair, something needs to be done. They've got a so-called monopoly. And, well, no, this is just a result of consumer sovereignty. Consumers realize that Amazon is a good provider of goods and services. And so the consumers, have decided who stays in business and who doesn't. And that as soon as you get government involved, deciding who's going to be the winner and who's going to be the loser, that's when all of a sudden the standard of living starts to stultify and ultimately start diminishing. It's what Schumpeter, the economist Schumpeter, called creative destructionism, where, yeah, in an unhampered market economy, there's businesses going out of business, but that's because of consumer sovereignty. Consumers are deciding who stays in business through their buying habits and refraining from buying.
Yeah, in fact, what we're doing right now, Jacob, 50 or 60 years was not possible. If you wanted to watch something on television, you were restricted to 3 networks, ABC, NBC, and CBS, and a few local affiliates. And you watched television with the antenna on the roof of your house, or with the old-fashioned rabbit ears sitting on top of your television in the living room. And you'd have to hold the antenna and stand in a weird position to get a good picture on the screen. Some people are old enough to remember that. I used to be part of the antenna as a kid. I also was the remote. Before remotes, I got up and changed the channel. My mother would say, "Change the channel." I was the remote. But anyway, but the fact is that it was the ending of basically the cartel control over televised media by the 3 networks, and allowing television to be opened up, to video media to be opened up, that we're doing what we're doing. 40 years ago, 50 years ago, there wasn't YouTube. There wasn't the ability for a website to be able to download and stream something that they had produced that they wished to share with the community. This has opened a wide diversity and plethora of alternatives that we, the consumers, now take for granted, whether it is with hundreds of channels on our television provider, on our cable provider, or whether it be these forms of making your own messages, whether comedy, serious, documentary, politics, scientific, about dogs, whatever. That this is all the result of people having to satisfy consumer demand and having the liberty to do so by unrestraining the marketplace from hampering government regulations and controls that guarded and sheltered a few, but at the expense of everyone else in the society. This is the benefit of freedom of communication with less, obviously it's not without, unfortunately, in America, but with less restriction and regulatory control than was the case 50 or 60 years ago with television.
Well, on that great note, Richard, we got to wrap it up. We're out of time, and I want to thank our consumers for consuming our product, watching us here on our weekly show, The Libertarian Angle. For more, come to our website at fff.org. Richard writes an article every week that we publish on Mondays, usually from a free market Austrian economics perspective, and I write a daily blog, and we have videos and conferences and so forth, so come and visit us at fff.org. Richard, as always, I greatly enjoyed the conversation, and I look forward to seeing you next week.
Until next time, and thank you all you viewers for joining us.